What if everything you thought you knew about the devil was wrong? Not the red-skinned monster with horns and a pitchfork, not the cartoon villain whispered about in childhood, but something older, stranger, and far more unsettling. Before he was called Satan, before the name Lucifer echoed through time, there was simply an accuser, a shadow in the court of heaven. He wasn't always the enemy. He didn't always fall. He had a place, a purpose, a role, until something changed. But what caused that fall? Was it pride, power, or a cosmic shift in the way humanity began to understand good and evil? This isn't just about the devil in flames. It's about the long, complex journey of an ideal one that evolved over centuries, shaped by war, exile, and forgotten scrolls buried in the sands of history. And as we trace the path from a nameless adversary to the Prince of Darkness, you'll start to see how deeply his story is entangled with ours. If you're ready to discover the truth behind the greatest enemy ever written, comment 777 below, because this story will challenge everything you thought you understood about heaven rebellion and the war that still rages unseen. If this stirred your spirit, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful biblical journeys. Now take a deep breath and follow me. The origin of Satan isn't what you think. Once you reach the end of this journey, the Bible might no longer look the same to you. Forbidden secret of Satan's true origins. What does the devil truly look like? It's a question whispered across centuries, painted on cathedral ceilings, echoed in the lines of ancient poetry, and caricatured in cartoons. In Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, George Clooney's character speaks of Satan with the easy confidence of a man who believes he knows red and scaly, with a bifurcated tail, carries the hayfork. A quaint image, isn't it familiar? Even comforting in a way, because a monster so absurd, so theatrical, couldn't possibly be real, could it? But let's step away from Hollywood. Let's peel back the layers of art and satire. The red skin, the horns, the pitchfork. None of these traits exist in the pages of the Bible. Not in Genesis, not in Revelation, not in the Gospels. This creature that haunts Halloween costumes and cereal boxes didn't crawl out of Scripture. It was conjured elsewhere, born of medieval fear, sculpted by Renaissance painters, shaped by the folklore of Europe, where the Christian devil merged with pagan imagery and mythic beasts. So where then did we get this image? Why has it endured? Could it be that this cartoonish devil became a useful straw man to ridicule or dismiss a symbol easily cast out, but never truly feared, because the real Satan, the one hinted at in Isaiah, Job, and Revelation, is far more cunning, far more beautiful, and far more terrifying than the scaly imp of children's books. As Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 11:14, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Now ask yourself, if Satan came to you in the form of a monster, would you not flee? But what if he came as everything you've ever wanted? But what if the devil is more than just a figure in red, more than a horned caricature of evil? In this video, we're not just dusting off ancient paintings or unraveling medieval myths. No, this time we're descending deeper, past the smoke and sulfur, past the pitchforks and tales from folklore. We're entering the very heart of the Christian understanding of Satan himself, not as a costume, but as a cosmic force, as the arch-enemy of God. So who is Satan really? For many Christians, he is not a metaphor, not merely the whisper of guilt when we do wrong, not just the symbolic embodiment of evil. He is real, a being, a creature of light who once stood among the highest angels, only to fall from glory by the weight of his pride, a rebel who tore open the fabric of heaven with his defiance and was cast down like lightning, as Jesus said in Luke 10:18, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." But do all Christians believe this? Not quite. Some, especially within certain modern theological circles, see Satan as a symbol, a literary device that personifies our inner struggle with sin and moral failure. In this view, he is not a being, but an idea, a shadow of our darker selves. And yet, is that view enough to explain the scale of evil we witness in the world? Or is it, as some would argue, too convenient? Too safe? Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics, doesn't mince words on this. He speaks of the devil, often seriously, soberly. He warns, we should not think of the devil as a myth, a representation, a symbol, a figure of speech, or an idea. This mistake would lead us to let down our guard. To him, and to many others across both Catholic and Orthodox traditions, Satan is no metaphor. He is a commander, a strategist, a roaring lion, as 1 Peter 5:8 says, seeking whom he may devour. Now pause for a moment. If you lived in a time long before science and psychology, you might have called evil a spirit, but today, in a world of algorithms and diagnoses, have we simply renamed him, hidden him? What if the greatest trick he ever pulled was not convincing the world he didn't exist, but making us believe we never needed to worry about him at all? What if Satan, as we picture him today, a rebellious angel, the prince of darkness, the sworn enemy of God, was not always understood this way? What if this idea, so deeply etched into Christian thought, didn't appear fully formed, but evolved over centuries? Across the Protestant world, beliefs about Satan vary as widely as the churches themselves. For some, he's little more than a shadow, in the background, a metaphor, a symbol, the name we give our darkest impulses. This view is common among certain mainline Protestant denominations who often interpret Scripture through a historical or poetic lens. But for others, particularly evangelicals and Pentecostals, Satan is not only real, he is active, dangerous, intentional, a hunter in the night. Can both be right? Among Pentecostal communities, especially, Satan is seen as the architect behind demonic oppression, the force behind illness, addiction, and moral collapse. Spiritual warfare isn't just theology, it's lived experience. Believers pray fast and cast out demons in the name of Christ, confronting evil not just as metaphor, but as reality. Yet even within a single congregation, you'll find diversity. Some will speak of Satan with fiery certainty. Others might hesitate, wonder, or reinterpret. And it's not just the pews that are divided. Survey data, though limited, paints a striking picture. A 2009 Barna Group study found that over 40% of American Christians strongly agreed with the statement that Satan is not a living being, but merely a symbol of evil. That's nearly half. Nearly half of those who profess faith in Christ believe the devil is a myth, a figure of speech. So, if you're watching this and wondering whether belief in a literal Satan is essential or even mainstream, know this disbelief is not a fringe opinion. It's a powerful undercurrent within modern Christianity. But here's the mystery we're diving into today. If Satan is indeed real, if he truly is a fallen angel, the arch nemesis of God himself, where did this idea come from? Because contrary to popular belief, this terrifying portrait of the devil wasn't always part of the story. The Satan of the Hebrew Bible, he's not the fire-breathing villain of Sunday school nightmares. He's different, more complex, sometimes even a servant of God. So how did we get from that to this? That's the path we'll be walking, step by step, layer by layer, until we uncover how history, literature, prophecy, and fear shaped the creature we now call Satan. So buckle in. The road ahead is ancient, and it rocks beneath our feet. Are you ready to descend? Let's go back, way back, before the horns, before the red skin, before the fiery throne of hell, before the devil had a name. In the religion of ancient Israel, the world wasn't yet divided into a cosmic battleground between a good God and an evil rival. In fact, in the earliest books of the Hebrew Bible, the idea of a singular, supreme, malevolent being, one who sets himself in opposition to God, was completely absent. There was no Lucifer, no devil with wings scorched by rebellion. There was only God, and then there were adversaries. But what does that word really mean? Adversary. The Hebrew noun shatan, which would eventually become Satan in English, originally wasn't a name at all. It simply meant opponent or accuser, and it was often used for humans. In 1 Samuel 29:4, for instance, the Philistines, suspicious of David's loyalties, warned their commanders, "Make him return, that he may not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us." Here, Shaitan refers to David, not a demon, not a devil, just a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. So when did Satan become something more? In later biblical texts, the idea of Satan begins to shift. No longer just a human adversary, the term starts to describe a kind of divine official, a cosmic prosecutor. And nowhere is this clearer than in the book of Job. In the opening of Job, we're pulled into the heavens, into what seems to be a divine courtroom. God sits on the throne. Around him are the sons of God, the heavenly beings. And among them stands Satan, the accuser. Not Satan as we know him, but Satan with a definite article. He is not a rebel. He is not evil. He is doing his job. And what a chilling job it is. In Job 1:9-11, the accuser challenges Job's integrity. Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him? But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. There is no malice here, no fire and brimstone, just cold, brutal logic. What if the righteous man is only righteous because he's never suffered? What if faith is just a transaction? Satan is not a fallen angel here. He's part of the heavenly bureaucracy. We see him again in Zechariah 3, where he accuses the high priest Joshua. But this time, he is opposed by the angel of the Lord who stands as Joshua's defender. Once again, Satan acts as a prosecutor, seeking guilt not out of hatred, but as part of his function. What if the being we fear as Satan began not as an enemy of God, but as his servant? What if the origin of evil in the biblical story was not rebellion, but permission? And what if Satan's role, at least in these ancient texts, was not to destroy the faithful, but to test them? These glimpses from Job and Zechariah leave us with a disquieting image, a universe where suffering is allowed, even orchestrated not by a devil in opposition to God, but by an accuser working within the divine order. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in that courtroom beside Job. The heavenly beings observe you. Satan circles slowly, waiting to speak. What would he accuse you of? Would you pass the test? But here's what should give us pause. Despite the familiar tone and imagery we associate with the devil, neither of the references to the Satan in the Hebrew Bible line up with the Christian concept of Satan as we know him today. In the book of Job, the accuser is not a prince of darkness. He does not fall from heaven. He doesn't command legions of demons or wage war against the Almighty. Quite the opposite. He stands in God's divine counsel. He works for God. And though he seeks to test and accuse, he only does so with divine permission. He is an instrument, not a rival. Likewise, in Zechariah, Satan serves a judicial function. He accuses Joshua the high priest of wrongdoing. But again, this is not rebellion. This is procedure. The angel of the Lord rebukes him. Yes, but nowhere is there a hint that this Satan is an enemy of God. He's more like a prosecuting attorney in a celestial courtroom than a commander of hellish armies. And yet, the picture begins to shift. These subtle but pivotal appearances of Satan are not found in the oldest layers of biblical literature. They surface only in later writings, texts composed during or shortly after one of the most traumatic events in Israel's history, the Babylonian exile. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian army laid waste to Jerusalem. The temple, the beating heart of Israelite faith, was reduced to ruins. The ruling elites were ripped from their land and dragged into captivity. And for decades, the Israelites lived as strangers in a foreign empire. But exile is more than displacement. It's disorientation. It's the death of old certainties and the birth of dangerous questions. Why would God allow this, who is truly in control? If Yahweh is sovereign, how could evil triumph? And it's in this crucible of confusion, far from the temple and homeland, that we begin to see theological concepts shifting. When the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, overthrew the Babylonians, they allowed the Israelites to return home. But with them, the returning exiles carried new ideas. Ideas many scholars believe were drawn from exposure to Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of the Persian Empire. Could this be the missing piece? Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, and at its core is a cosmic dualism, a perpetual war between Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of evil and deceit. This evil being is not merely permitted by the divine he is opposed to. A true archenemy. Sound familiar? What if during exile, the Israelites absorbed this dualistic framework? What if the vague, ambiguous figure of Satan, once just a divine functionary, began to morph into something more sinister under the influence of Persian theology? Not a role, but a person. Not a servant, but a traitor. Could this be the seed of the Satan we know today? Let's imagine you're one of the exiles in Babylon. Everything you knew has crumbled. Your temple is gone. Your priests are scattered. Your prayers feel unanswered. And then from across a strange border of belief, you hear whispers of a dark force, a being of malevolence that wars against the holy. For the first time, evil has a name, a face, a purpose. It makes me wonder, was the devil born not in a blaze of rebellion, but in the quiet terror of exile? For roughly 200 years, from the return of the exiles to the rise of Alexander the Great, Judea lived in the shadow of Persia, not as an occupied ruin, but as a province under imperial oversight, a people rebuilding their identity beneath the wings of a foreign empire. But this wasn't just a political occupation. It was a cosmic cross-pollination. The Judean elite scribes, priests, prophets found themselves in close proximity to Zoroastrian priests, the Magi of Persia. These were no mere pagan philosophers. They were the gatekeepers of one of the most sophisticated religious systems of the ancient world, a system that saw the universe as a battlefield between two equal and opposing forces, the perfectly good Ahura Mazda and the utterly evil Angra Mainyu. And in that system, there was no ambiguity. Angra Mainyu wasn't a tool of judgment or a prosecutor in the divine court. He was a personal, malevolent being set on corrupting creation, deceiving the world, and opposing the divine order at every turn. He was not a servant, he was a saboteur. He did not ask for God's permission. he waged war against him for nearly 2 centuries, beginning around 550 BCE, when the exiled Jews were permitted to return from Babylon until the sweeping conquests of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE. Judea remained firmly under the control of the Persian Empire. While the people rebuilt their temple and re-established their traditions, the cultural and theological influence of Persia quietly seeped into the heart of post-exilic Jewish thought. This wasn't merely a period of political transition, it was a spiritual intersection. What kinds of conversations did Judean priests have with Persian religious authorities? What concepts might have been absorbed, whether intentionally or unknowingly, into the evolving identity of Israel's God and his adversaries? Scholars believe this was the period when some Judean thinkers began to wrestle with, and potentially adopt key ideas from Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of Persia at the time. Zoroastrianism, an ancient and still living faith originating in what is now Iran, proclaimed a powerful dualism at the very heart of its worldview. At its center stood Ahura Mazda, a divine, supremely good being who created order, light, and truth. But this god did not reign uncontested. Opposing him was Angra Mainyu, also known as Ahriman, a purely evil, destructive force who sought to spread deception, chaos, and suffering across the world. This image of an absolute evil being, locked in an eternal struggle against an all-good God, marked a sharp contrast to earlier Israelite theology in which God alone reigned supreme, and even calamities were ultimately under his command. But now, under Persian influence, some Jewish thinkers may have begun to ponder a darker possibility. What if evil had a will of its own? What if suffering and temptation were not merely tools used by God to test his people, but the workings of a malicious enemy with his own agenda? Could this have been the conceptual seed that eventually grew into the Christian image of Satan? This theory doesn't suggest the Jews abandoned their faith. Rather, it proposes that as they rebuilt their worldview after the trauma of exile, they may have reframed old ideas in the light of new experiences and influences. The Satan of older texts, once a mere human adversary or divine prosecutor, began to shift in shape and intention. Something more permanent, more dangerous, more personal began to form. Yet as we try to untangle the threads of ancient theology and pinpoint exactly how Zoroastrian ideas may have infiltrated post-exilic Jewish thought, we run into a problem. Several, in fact. The path ahead is not well lit. Scholars who are intimately familiar with both Jewish apocalyptic literature and Zoroastrian scripture are astonishingly rare. We stand on ground that is largely uncharted, where the lights of academic clarity flicker dimly. Much of what we do know, if we can say we know it at all, rests on fragments, on comparative hints, on linguistic echoes whispered across centuries of sacred texts. Even so, those few who do straddle both worlds, such as Albert de Jong, one of the leading scholars of Iranian religion, insist that the fingerprints of Zoroastrian thought can be found all over the theological writings of the Second Temple period. But de Jong and others are quick to caution. The word influence is far too simplistic. It suggests a clean directional flow of ideas from one culture to another. But reality is messier. This was not a seminar. It was a collision of civilizations, a long and winding exchange shaped by empire-exile dialogue, trauma, and hope. The Judeans didn't sit in classrooms learning Zoroastrian doctrine. They lived under its shadow, debated with its priests, and carried its echoes into their dreams of judgment, Messiah, and apocalypse. And yet some signs of this influence are so blatant, they practically shout from the page. Take the demon Asmodeus, for instance, the central antagonist in the Book of Tobit, a particularly cruel and sadistic spirit who murders 7 of Sarah's husbands before the wedding night. The name Asmodeus isn't Hebrew, it's Persian. In origin, almost certainly derived from the Zoroastrian figure Ashmadeva, a fierce and frenzied lieutenant of Angra Mainyu, the embodiment of cosmic evil. This isn't just linguistic drift, this is theological convergence. But the deeper signs are more than just borrowed names. As Jewish apocalyptic literature begins to take shape in texts, like 1 Enoch, Daniel Jubilees, and others, a pattern begins to emerge: a cosmic war. A war between light and darkness, a final reckoning between forces of ultimate good and beings of absolute evil. Where earlier scriptures had portrayed evil as a corruption, a mistake, or even a test under God's control, now evil became a rival force, a spiritual entity with agency and ambition. This dualism, this moral polarity mapped onto cosmic terrain, was not native to ancient Israel, but it was central to Zoroastrian cosmology. And so we begin to see a shift. Yahweh, once solitary and unrivaled in his rule, now has an enemy, not just human kings or disobedient nations, but a spiritual being lurking in the shadows, deceiving, accusing, and leading others astray. A being who begins to resemble not just an accuser, but the adversary. If we want to find the clearest echo of Iranian dualism in ancient Jewish theology, we need look no further than the Dead Sea Scrolls, those weathered fragments of parchment hidden for centuries in the caves of Qumran beneath the burning Judean sun. These scrolls, rediscovered in the mid-20th century, have become a kind of theological time capsule, preserving ideas that were once whispered in secret by a radical sect of Jews awaiting the end of the world. And among these faded ink strokes, we witness a dramatic shift in spiritual cosmology, a clear break from older Hebrew traditions. The God of Israel is still supreme, but now he is not alone in the heavens. He is opposed. One of the central texts, known as the Community Rule, lays it bare. The God of Israel created the spirits of light and darkness and founded every action upon them. With that single sentence, a new cosmology takes the shape of a worldview in which every human deed, every thought, every sin and act of righteousness is tethered to one of 2 primordial forces. The angel of light inspires truth and humility, while the angel of darkness, a corrupting force, seduces the righteous, leads them into error, and plants within them every wicked inclination. This is not the ancient Satan of Job, still a part of God's court. This is something new. This is cosmic war, and this dark spirit has a name: Belial, a shadowy being who, according to the text, rules over an army of fallen angels, commanding them like a general of darkness. All their sins, iniquities, wickedness, and all their unlawful deeds, the scroll continues, are caused by his dominion. Evil in this theology is no longer merely rebellion or failure. It is a calculated invasion of darkness upon the soul. Belial is not temptation. He is sovereign, a king of chaos, a prince of perversion. But the picture sharpens even further in the War Scroll, another apocalyptic vision found among the caves. Here we see the final confrontation, painted in mythic hues. On one side stand the sons of light, led by none other than Michael the Archangel, the heavenly warrior prince of Israel. On the other side, Belial, who now fully resembles a Satan-like figure commanding the sons of darkness, preparing for the last war, the ultimate reckoning between good and evil. light versus dark, Michael versus Belial, order versus destruction. This is not the theology of Moses or the poetry of David. This is apocalyptic dualism, and it mirrors almost point for point the ancient battle in Zoroastrian cosmology between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, between truth and the lie between Asha and Druj. For many scholars, the evidence is unmistakable. The sect that wrote these scrolls, most likely the Essenes, had absorbed, whether consciously or not, the Zoroastrian paradigm, shaping it into a uniquely Jewish eschatology. They didn't just borrow names or rituals, they internalized the struggle, mapped it onto their scriptures, and began to wait for a final day when Belial would be crushed under the heel of divine justice. So now, in the fading twilight of Second Temple Judaism, Satan is no longer a title, no longer a test, but a threat. Some scholars dare to look even deeper into the mystery, peeling back another layer of ancient belief to uncover what they believe is an even more profound root, a controversial sect of Zoroastrianism known as the Zervanites. This group, almost lost to time, proposed a radical twist on the cosmic drama. To them, Ahura Mazda, the being of pure light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction, were not eternal foes independently battling for supremacy. No, they were brothers, twins, born of a higher singular force, Zervan, the god of infinite time, the prime mover from which all reality flows. And under Zervan's indifferent gaze, the war between good and evil became not just a spiritual clash, but a cosmic tragedy of fate. Now here's where it gets strange. Some scholars believe that this Zervanite idea, that a supreme deity presides over two opposing spirits, found a peculiar mirror in the theology of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember, in those scrolls, God is still sovereign, still the ultimate judge, but he creates or governs both the spirits of light and darkness. He sets the stage, chooses the roles, and lets the drama play out. It's not dualism in the strict sense, it's something more unsettling. It's a divinely permitted duality, a heavenly paradox. And the Dead Sea Scrolls were not alone in this. Long before they were tucked into caves, the seeds of a singularly evil angelic figure had already begun to germinate, most strikingly in one of the most haunting and mysterious texts of ancient Judaism, the book of 1 Enoch. 1 Enoch is not part of the Hebrew Bible, but it was beloved by many early Jewish and Christian groups. It opens a window into an apocalyptic imagination set aflame, and it takes one small passage from Genesis 6, the strange tale of the sons of God and the daughters of men, and explodes it into an epic of cosmic corruption. In Enoch's telling, these angels, later called the Watchers, did more than just seduce human women. They descended with purpose, bearing forbidden knowledge. They taught humanity sorcery, enchantments, the reading of stars, the forging of weapons, dark arts that poisoned the earth and triggered divine judgment. And at the head of this celestial rebellion, the text offers names, but not the ones we might expect. There is no Satan here, no Belial. Instead, the mantle of evil falls on two shadowy figures, Shemi-Haza and Azazel. In the earliest section of Enoch, the Book of the Watchers, Shemi-Haza is the ringleader, the one who convinces the other angels to take the plunge. But Azazel is the corrupter, the one who teaches men how to wage war, how to beautify sin, how to weaponize wisdom. It is Azazel whose name lingers in the air like sulfur, the one whom God singles out for special punishment. The confusion deepens. In some passages, the archangel Michael rises against Shemi-Haza, while Raphael is sent to bind Azazel. In other parts of 1 Enoch, The boundaries between the two seem to blur, as if the evil is spreading, fragmenting, multiplying. In the dream vision section of the book, the angels appear as stars, and Azazel is the first to fall, plunging like a meteor from the heavens. And here, perhaps, for the first time in apocalyptic literature, evil becomes gravity. The fall is no longer a metaphor. It is a spectacle. It is a divine rebellion that pierces the firmament, a war in the stars that lands on earth and sows chaos into the bones of mankind. These watchers are not devils with horns. They are celestial beings radiant, once now rotting with pride. They fall not just from grace, but from the very structure of the heavens, dragging with them secrets never meant for mortal ears. And so piece by piece, the story takes shape of angels who fall of evil that teaches of a cosmos in rupture. The Satan of later texts is beginning to form, not yet named, not yet crowned, but his shadow is already moving. And yet, even as the shadowy outlines of a singular adversary begin to take shape, the word itself, Satan, remains elusive, unanchored, more concept than character. Yes, the word does appear in 1 Enoch, but not as the horned king of hell we've come to imagine. In one chilling passage, the prophet hears the voice of an archangel, an agent of divine wrath driving away the Satans. Plural. Not a name, but a classification, a category of beings, fallen angels, adversaries, saboteurs of the divine will. These Satans are not yet the devil. They are still a role, not a person. Even when the text uses Satan in the singular, scholars urge caution. Is it a proper name, a singular enemy of God? Or is it, as in Job, merely a title, the accuser, the opposer, the tester, one who challenges but does not yet rebel? The line is fine, blurred by centuries and context, and yet it marks the slow transformation from title to tyrant. This ambiguity becomes even clearer in another apocalyptic book, born from the same cultural furnace, the Book of Jubilees. This strange retelling of Genesis doesn't just retread old ground, it expands it with darker corners and deeper devils. Here, a figure appears who feels like a prototype for the later Satan Mastema. He is powerful, he is hostile. He commands a horde of spirits that once served God, but now serve chaos. He is called the Satan. But again, this is not yet a name. It is a role, a mantle, like the Satan of Job. Mastema is not entirely cast out of heaven. He seems to serve God's purpose in testing the righteous and tempting the weak. He operates with permission, a reluctant servant of divine judgment. And yet, the seeds are sown. Across these texts, 1 Enoch, Jubilees, Job, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, we begin to see familiar patterns: Shemihaza, Azazel, Belial, Mastema, and the Satan. Different names, different roles, but all circling the same idea: an evil intelligence opposed to goodness, bound to darkness. Sometimes a tempter, sometimes a destroyer, sometimes even a puppet on God's strings, and always a mirror of the suffering in the world. Out of this storm of visions and apocalyptic fever, the ancient world began to imagine what it had never truly seen before: one enemy, one prince of rebellion, one Satan who was no longer just the accuser, but the enemy of God himself. And it was into this crucible of ideas, this volatile mix of fallen angels, cosmic battles, Persian dualism, and prophetic fire, that the early Jesus movement was born. It would be Jesus and the writers who followed him who would take these broken fragments and forge from them the devil we know today. And now we step into the world of the New Testament, a world still burning with apocalyptic expectation, still echoing with the voices of prophets, seers, and poets of exile. But something has changed. The shadows have coalesced. The adversary now has a face, a name, and most of all, a mission. Unlike the fragmented pantheon of dark figures that haunt the pages of 1st Enoch or the Book of Jubilees, the New Testament begins to refine and focus this evil into a singular antagonist. The name Belial, that fierce enemy of light from the Dead Sea Scrolls, all but disappears, surfacing only briefly in the writings of the Apostle Paul. There, Paul invokes Belial not as a demon with his own mythos, but as a symbolic counterweight to Christ himself, the embodiment of wickedness, the antithesis of the Messiah. But beyond that flicker, the name fades, giving way to something older, colder, and far more familiar: Satan. The New Testament doesn't invent him, but it cements him. And this Satan, though shaped by Jewish tradition, now bears the marks of Hellenistic influence. In the Greek tongue, he is not just Satanas, but Diabolos, the slanderer, the accuser, the one who divides. From this word, we draw diabolic devil and all the echoes of horror that follow. But beneath the language lies the same core the opposer now fully awakened. He still acts at times as a tester. He challenges Jesus in the desert, not with brute force, but with subtlety, scripture, and seduction. He tempts Judas Iscariot, not with chains, but with whispers that twist the soul. His power is psychological, theological, and cosmic all at once, but his reach is broader now. In the minds of the early Christians, Satan has become a ruler, the archon of demons, the dark prince of this fallen age. He is no longer just a prosecutor in God's courtroom. He is a saboteur in God's creation. He causes illness, spreads, lies, devours the weak, and schemes in the shadows of empires. He doesn't just test anymore. He corrupts. And yet, for all the New Testament says, it reveals something even deeper, that this Satan is not new. He is the final expression of a theology centuries in the making, a fusion of names and natures: Azael, the teacher of forbidden arts; Belial, the son of lawlessness; Mastema, the adversarial spirit. The devil of the Gospels is not the invention of Jesus' time. It is the culmination of a slow, fiery evolution. A patchwork of warnings and visions stitched together through suffering conquest and cosmic longing. This is not just a villain. This is the ultimate enemy, and as we enter the rest of the New Testament, we'll watch as his power grows, his strategies darken, and the early church begins to understand they are at war. History, as it turns out, has a long shadow, and throughout the ages, Christians have cast that shadow backward, reading the Hebrew Bible through the lens of the New Testament Satan, searching for traces of the devil long before he was named. So the serpent in Eden, once a mysterious creature of cunning, became Satan in disguise. The oracle in Isaiah, once a poetic denunciation of a Babylonian king, transformed into Satan's tragic origin story. How you have fallen from heaven, O Daystar, son of dawn. A lament for an earthly ruler, perhaps arrogant, perhaps cruel, but never intended to be a biography of the devil. And yet, when this Daystar was translated into Latin as Lucifer, a new myth was born. A single word took on eternal weight. Lucifer, the light-bringer who fell, became one of the most enduring names of the adversary. But here's the thing. None of this is about debunking belief. My goal with this video was never to tear down faith. It was to build up something else: historical imagination. Because if we want to truly understand Satan, we must look not only through the stained glass of theology, but through the dust and ink of time. The 5 C's of historical thinking. They are not answers, but instruments of clarity, a compass for wandering through the past. Change over time, ideas evolve. Satan was not always Satan. Context: the devil was shaped by empires, exiles, and encounters with other religions. Causality: what events and conditions gave rise to this figure of cosmic rebellion? Complexity: evil is rarely simple. Neither are our stories about it. Contingency: things could have been different. Belial could have eclipsed Satan. Azael could have endured. History is not inevitable. So, what does all this mean? It means that the devil, like all powerful ideas, was not born in a single verse or moment, but formed across centuries, chiseled by culture, sharpened by fear, and crowned by imagination. And whether you see him as literal or symbolic, the shadow of Satan reveals not only what we fear, but what we believe about justice, power, and the war between good and evil. Change over time isn't some abstract academic idea. It's a reminder, a warning. Just because the word Satan appears in both the book of Job and the Gospel of Matthew doesn't mean we're looking at the same figure. 500 years lie between them, half a millennium of wars, empires, exiles, and shifting worldviews. In that gulf, ideas mature, mutate, and multiply. The Satan of Job is a heavenly prosecutor, a functionary of divine justice. But by the time of the New Testament, Satan has become a prince of darkness, a cosmic enemy, a destroyer. So before we draw a line between 2 verses, we must check ourselves. History breathes. It moves. The second C is context. No idea exists in a vacuum, and Satan is no exception. He was forged in the fire of conquest and captivity. In the shadow of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, Jewish thinkers came face to face with Zoroastrian dualism, where good and evil were locked in eternal war. Later, under the iron weight of Hellenistic rule, new apocalyptic visions were born, visions where evil had a face, a name, a will. If we want to understand Satan, we must understand the world that shaped him. Empires rise, empires fall, but their ghosts linger in our myths. Then comes causality, the third C. And this one is slippery. In science, you can run the same experiment 1,000 times and watch the same reaction unfold. But in history, we only get one timeline, one chance. The past has already spoken, and it speaks in fragments. A broken inscription here, a crumbling manuscript there. We can suggest that Zoroastrianism shaped the Jewish notion of Satan. We can see the parallels, a cosmic battle, a spirit of light, a spirit of darkness. But we'll never know who started the conversation. Was it whispered over firelight by an exiled priest in Babylon? Was it debated in the royal court of Persia? That moment, that first spark, is lost to time. So we rely on logic, on language, on the patterns etched into ancient scrolls and sacred texts. We trace the shadows, but we do not pretend to hold the sun. And then there is complexity, perhaps the most human of all the C's. Because history is never neat. It resists simple answers. It defies one-to-one equations. To say Zoroastrianism caused the concept of Satan would be a lie of omission. It flattens centuries of pain, power, poetry, and prophecy into a single thread. No, the truth is richer and far more tangled. The Jewish people weren't just borrowing ideas. They were surviving exile, wrestling with justice, dreaming of vindication, fighting to make sense of evil in a world where evil often seemed to win. Ideas don't descend from heaven fully formed. They rise out of struggle. They carry the fingerprints of the oppressed, the cries of the prophets, and the ink-stained hands of anonymous scribes who dared to imagine that maybe, just maybe, there is a shape to the darkness, a name for it. And finally, we arrive at contingency, the last and perhaps the most unsettling of the 5 C's. To say history is contingent is to admit something deeply uncomfortable, that everything could have turned out differently. That nothing, not even the shape of good and evil as we know it today, was inevitable. Imagine the long chain of events. Babylon conquers Judah. Judah is sent into exile. Then Persia conquers Babylon. And Persia, they send the exiles home, each moment linked like falling dominoes. But what if just one domino had fallen differently? What if Babylon had never risen to power? What if the Persians had not been tolerant of foreign religions? What if the Judeans in exile had never encountered Zoroastrian dualism, never sat beneath Persian stars, wondering whether darkness had a name? Change any one of those conditions, and the story of Satan, the architecture of Christian theology, even the way millions envision good and evil today, might not exist. This is what contingency reminds us, that history does not march in a straight line toward a foregone conclusion. That the idea of Satan as a horned enemy, as the serpent in Eden, as the tempter in the desert, that whole framework was not fated. It was forged out of trauma, exile dialogue, war translation, politics belief. In the early 20th century, it was popular for historians to tell teleological stories that Christianity was destined to overcome paganism, that its doctrines were meant to crystallize the way they did. But that's not how history works. If the winds had blown just slightly differently, maybe it would have been another sect one that saw the serpent as a liberator, not a deceiver that carried the cross forward. Contingency humbles us. It reminds us that even the most sacred ideas were once just choices made in the dark, subject to the chaos of their time. Whenever you dive into a religious concept, let the 5C framework guide you. It's your lens for seeing the rich historical layers behind every belief and tradition. We often imagine evil as something loud, monstrous, impossible to miss. But history, real history, shows us that the most dangerous lies are the ones that evolve quietly, that the greatest enemy isn't always the one standing in front of us, but the one whispering behind us. Satan's story isn't just about a celestial rebellion. It's about how truth can be twisted, how power can corrupt, and how easily we too can fall when we forget where we came from. In every age, humanity has faced its own version of the fall systems, built on pride leaders consumed by ambition societies that trade light for darkness in the name of progress. And still, the lesson remains: the enemy never starts with fire. He starts with doubt. So the next time you're confronted with a choice between what is easy and what is right, between the shallow glory of the world and the eternal truth of God, remember this: Lucifer didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he forgot who the light truly belongs to. Let this be our reminder. Knowledge without humility leads to ruin. Power without righteousness becomes destruction. And truth without love is a sword in the wrong hands. You are not alone in this battle. I see your heart. I know your questions. My truth is greater than the lies of the enemy, and my love is stronger than the fall. Come closer, not to fear, but to me. I am the beginning and the end, the light the darkness cannot overcome. Your Father in heaven. If this message stirred something inside, you drop a 777 in the comments and let us know you're walking this path with open eyes and a guarded heart. And if you haven't already liked this video, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to see the bigger picture behind the oldest war ever told.